everybody. Before I begin, let me begin up front with two preemptive apologies. One of them is that I do not record this in a real studio. I record it in a home office. I often have my window open, although sometimes I don't, depending on the weather. There is some construction going on in my neighborhood right around the corner from my house, actually, and there are a lot of birds right now, so there may be some background noise. I'm trying to do my best to minimize it, but if there is, that's why. Also, I want to apologize, not preemptively, for the way that I record these is I don't edit them. There's just kind of stream of conscious talking a little bit, and occasionally that means that I make mistakes because I don't edit them. A couple episodes ago, I referred to Star Wars as borrowing a lot of elements from the Lensman book, Triplanetary. I was wrong. It is not the book Triplanetary. It is the book Galactic Patrol, which is another book in the Lensman series instead. And I said earlier that it almost reads like a draft of Star Wars. I wouldn't... I'm going to pull back a little bit from that and say that was probably a step too far. There's a lot of elements from it that were borrowed, but a lot that are not. And the Lensman, although the Jedi clearly are a nod towards the Lensman in many ways, the Green Lantern Corps of DC Comics fame is a more clear derivation of the concept of the Lensman than the Jedi are. The Jedi are usually more toned down and kind of have more of a feel of the psionic or magical or whatever you want to call it elements of Dune with a cool laser sword. Anyway, today I'm going to talk about the prequel trilogy, and I'm going to talk about all three of them because I think that the strengths and weaknesses of the trilogy are spread out throughout the entire trilogy, and they're evident in all three of the movies. The prequel trilogy is a fascinating set of movies to watch. Not necessarily because they're great movies, because they're not. They were, in fact, in many ways, deeply disappointing movies that we expected a lot more from than what we got. But at the same time, they're fascinating because you can see that even with all of these great elements that they had, you can see where they went wrong and why they didn't work. The prequel trilogy, to me, damaged the brand of Star Wars and the franchise, the estimation that I had for it for many, many years. And it took some other stuff, notably the Clone Wars TV show and the Knights of the Old Republic game, in many ways to rehabilitate it back for me. And of course, we'll talk about some of that other stuff. I think my trajectory is this. I'm going to talk about the prequel trilogy a little bit today. I'm going to talk about the expanded universe, or EU, next time I do this, and then we'll talk about the sequel trilogy. And then we'll see where we go from there. That's enough planning. The prequel trilogy... where to start? I think there's three things that went wrong with the prequel trilogy. The first one is simple execution and craftsmanship. The movies are not very well made movies. Visually, they're stunning. They're beautiful to look at, but they're just not very well made. George Lucas used to recognize when he was younger, in fact, he said this frequently, I'm not a great writer. I'm not very confident in my writing. I want to have a story and then give it to a screenwriter who can polish it up and make it really good. He used to say that, and then for some reason between the time of the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, he decided that he had to do it himself because he didn't think anybody else could translate his vision, and maybe that he was disappointed in some ways with the result of what came out of his earlier interactions, or maybe he just couldn't find the right people to work with. For whatever reason, he did the prequel trilogy himself. The writing is not very good. The dialogue is really quite bad. There's a lot of little elements of things that are really quite stupid and insipid and inane. I'm talking about things, and Revenge of the Sith is maybe kind of the one that gets the lion's share of well, maybe that's not true. I mean, there's things like the you're not like sand dialogue. There's the Obi-Wan's big plan to deal with all of the bad guys gathered together is to just jump in and say hello there. And after fighting a huge duel where they were up and down on falling superstructure of a mining facility, suddenly it's over because Obi-Wan is on top of a little hill and he has the high ground. I mean, there's just a lot of like really stupid things that a good writer would have said, yeah, that's not really going to work, and let's take the same idea but do it differently. And Lucas didn't do that. Like I said, the dialogue is just really terrible. I think also Lucas either didn't really realize or something how much the original Star Wars movie was saved in editing. The original cut, before it was given to the editors to fix, was very ponderous and slow and had a whole bunch of stuff. There's little elements that needed to be cut. Scenes stretched out too long. Stuff wasn't strung together in a way that kept the flow and the pacing moving. And Lucas, with more control in the prequel trilogies, kind of went back to that. And the prequels feel that way. They feel the way that the first cut of Star Wars did before the editors fixed it. And there's more, but you kind of get the point. Is that there's a serious flaw in the craftsmanship of the movies. They're simply, no matter how good the original source material that they're trying to turn into a movie, the story, the screenplay, the script, whatever, no matter how good that may be, it was flawed by poor movie making, ironically. The second problem that they had is this is a complete lack of vision, I think, about the setting. And Lucas just could not make up his mind how things worked, and he bounces around all over the place in a way that makes no sense, creates a lot of confusion and whiplash. By this I mean, in particular, that the Jedi are consistently portrayed as if they are supposed to be really wise, really great. They are heroes, and yet they consistently don't act like them. They consistently act like self-righteous bullies who live in a bubble, quite honestly, and make stupid decisions because they don't care about people, because they're actually evil. And I don't think that it would have been interesting if Lucas had portrayed this as, the Jedi do live in a bubble, and they have become disconnected from what they're supposed to be, and their flaws are part of what led to their downfall. That actually would have been an interesting take had he done that. But he didn't do that. It was inadvertent. I'm quite sure it was inadvertent. It was either so subtle that even now he denies it, or it was inadvertent. That the Jedi really are evil and in fact the bad guys of the movie. That doesn't mean that the Sith are the good guys, because they're equally bad guys, but the Jedi are the bad guys of the movie. And their failings towards Anakin, towards the galaxy, towards everybody are just incredibly evil. I think that, and I've pointed out before, I think that the Jedi of the Clone Wars period, or the pre-Clone Wars period even, seem like they're always pushy and swinging their lightsabers and killing people when they should step back and let people exercise their freedom. And then they fail to step up and be heroic exactly when they need to. So they're always getting involved in the wrong situations at the wrong time. And like I said, they come across more as self-righteous bullies than they do as, heroic and noble peacekeepers. And yet, everybody in the setting treats them as if they are noble, heroic peacekeepers. And it's not like, the propaganda is this is what they are, and as I become exposed to you, I realize how rotten you are. It's not that at all. It's they don't ever let go of the notion that the Jedi are noble and heroic. And even Lucas himself kind of doesn't ever let go of the notion that the Jedi are noble and heroic. And yet, in reality, very little of their actions as portrayed in the prequel trilogies, or even for that matter, often in the Clone Wars series, which followed it, are actually noble and heroic. They tend to be self-righteous bullies. Again, I think that this is because Lucas, growing up in Modesto in the early 50s or late 50s and early 60s, you would think that he would know better, but he became involved with kind of the San Francisco crew, the LA film school crew, and he became a hippie, and he lost his sense of moral right and wrong. And the Star Wars movies reflects a kind of nihilistic situational morality, which is entirely removed from what the works that inspired Star Wars, and in fact they're also entirely removed from reality or from the minds of his audience. So there's this big disconnect, in my opinion, between what the Jedi are supposed to be and what they actually are. And this lack of vision seriously mars the prequel trilogy and makes it, in many cases, it makes it difficult to enjoy the films, even if you can look past the craftsmanship. I think the third problem, maybe this is the smallest, but maybe in some ways it's not, is that Lucas also became so enamored of the Jedi that he overpowered them in the prequel trilogy. He made them flat out superheroes that nobody else could hold a candle to, and they become too important, too significant, too powerful, too cool, I guess, where they become themselves Deus Ex Machina. They have the Superman problem to some degree. And it starts from the very, very beginning. Within the first few minutes of The Phantom Menace starting, Liam Neeson thrusts his lightsaber completely through a blast door and starts cutting it open, which only is supposed to take a minute or two to do. This is an unprecedented use of a lightsaber, and it's like, well, if that were something that could be done, don't you think Vader would have done that on the Death Star and kept the Millennium Falcon from escaping right after he killed Ben Kenobi? So, like, well, no, because that's not something a lightsaber can do. He just made that up on the spot, and he made lightsabers much more powerful than they used to be. Why is it that suddenly a lightsaber can cut through anything? It shouldn't be able to. There's concept art from before the first Star Wars starts where lightsabers were much more modest. In fact, stormtroopers had them. There's a picture of a stormtrooper holding a lightsaber, and there's pictures of stormtroopers holding metal shields, presumably because they stop a lightsaber. So lightsabers became too powerful. Force powers became too powerful. As if you look at it, in reality, the Force is relatively modest in the original trilogy. And, Luke can do what? He can make a lightsaber fly from the snow to his hand. He can, he's a good fighter with it. He can block blaster bolts sometimes, although he's not great at it. Sometimes he gets shot anyway. He can make a Gamorrean guard choke for a moment. He can convince the weak-minded to follow his suggestions, and he can kind of, jump around. Like when he gets knocked into the carbon freezing chamber, he jumps out of it, 20 feet up. And Vader, who should have known better, suddenly says, "Oh, most impressive that he can do that." Like, that's something really cool. And in fact, we never see Vader do that kind of stuff, which is also interesting. When Yoda lifts the X-Wing out of the swamp, that's really impressive to us because we've never imagined that the Force is that powerful before. And in fact, we're led to believe that Yoda is kind of a Force prodigy anyway. So we don't necessarily believe that it's common that any Jedi can do that anyway. When the Emperor starts shooting lightning out of his hands, again, it's kind of like, what? That's crazy. I've never seen anything like that before. By the time we get to the prequel, that kind of stuff is routine, which kind of ruins the effect. People make roofs collapse routinely. They shoot lightning around routinely. I don't know, they just kind of do more and more. And this escalated not just in the prequel trilogies, although the prequel trilogies certainly kind of ushered that in. But we see just freaking crazy things like, Force lightning bringing down entire fleets of ships in Rise of Skywalker, or even in The Force Unleashed, a video game, which is otherwise quite good, the Force, pulls a Star Destroyer out of the sky and crashes it to the surface of the planet. And it's kind of like, come on, if it was such a big deal that Yoda could bring an X-Wing, up out of a swamp where it was sitting just a couple feet under the surface, not even completely buried in the water, then if that was so impressive, then why in the world, how is that so impressive when, people were doing much more impressive things in the past? So he kind of ruined the setting in some ways by making the Jedi, he gave them the Superman problem. He made them so powerful that there were few problems that they couldn't solve by, just force it away. You see this often in the Clone Wars series where there are scenes that should be exciting and they're not, because there's no tension, because the Jedi just think everything is too easy, because to them it is too easy. Whole armies of droids, yeah, whatever, just wave your hand and force them away. So I think that's where the prequels went wrong. Those are the three big problems with it. And yet, in spite of that, there are good movies underneath that mountain of garbage that are trying to get out. And all of those individual flaws and maybe the instances of those flaws, I guess maybe, are in and of themselves inconsequential. They're not big enough by themselves to ruin the movies, but it's the fact that it's a whole mountain of them. The craftsmanship issues aren't just, an issue here and there. They're rife throughout the movies. The poor vision kind of flaws them in the first place, and then the overpowering of the Jedi really is a problem that excuse me, if anything, it almost geez, sorry, now I'm gonna wish I edited these movies. The overpowering of the Jedi metastasizes in many ways after the movies are over, and I think that it just piles up and it makes it a poor thing to do. And not only that, it's arguable that it was ever really a good idea to make prequels in the first place. It's probably just narratively weak and poor to take a character that we've already seen the end of his story arc and then go give further detail and exploration of the beginning of his story arc, even though we kind of already know it in broad hand-wavy strokes. And that's a problem too, and in fact I think that is a major problem with the expanded universe, the EU, is that they are unwilling to kind of do anything. They're usually unwilling to do anything too bold, and they kind of do tend to go, well, let's go explore, the life of this one kind of unusual looking extra who is in this shot, and it's kind of like, well, but who freaking cares about that extra? And not only that, you can't tell anything interesting about him because the major beats of the story are already plotted out, they're already locked into place, and you can't change them. So therefore, there's only a little bit that you can even say about any of these characters anyway. There's only so much you can do with young Darth Vader when you already know how he's going to end up. So that was probably not even the best idea to begin with, to go that way. What was a good thing to have done, and I wish in many ways that they had done this, but those novels are with us, is the Timothy Zahn Heir to the Empire stories. And it's a trilogy of books that's set 5 years after Return of the Jedi. It was written before the prequels. It was written before. It was in many ways the books that kicked off the expanded universe. There wasn't a whole lot of accretion of junk yet in there, and that was good. Those were good novels. That was kind of where Star Wars showed its promise after the original trilogy, that there was still some good stories left to be told in it. Unfortunately, the prequels were what we got instead, and although there's a lot of things that I like about them, I do have to say that they are too flawed to really ever be considered good movies. And they did, in fact, damaged the brand to me. And for a long time, I kind of didn't enjoy Star Wars that much because of the prequels. Anyway, let's stop there. This is already longer than I hoped it would be, and then we'll pick up with the expanded universe next time.